now, and the format of this webinar is going to be sort of a fireside chat between myself, Daniel Holt, and Andrew Bickerton from the HUD group. So slightly different to the more technical webinars we've done in the past, but I still think it's still as interesting as ever. So Andrew, do you just want to introduce yourself to start off with?
Brent, thank you, Dan. So my name is Andrew Bickerton, as Dan mentioned, and I work here at THG. I've been working with databases, as I like to say it, since before SQL Server was SQL Server. So quite a long time, covering off a lot of different databases, FoxPro, DB2, Sybase, SQL Server, getting into some of the NoSQL world, including React, and felt a strong interest in CockroachDB fairly early on in their life. Here at THG, I head up a VRE team, so data reliability engineers, and we're responsible for looking at and investigating new technologies to support our data and growth, and making sure we have the tooling behind it to support its use and make sure they are successful.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. And just for anybody who's not aware on the call, do you want to give a little bit of a background into the HUD group themselves and what space they're in and what they do?
Brett, thank you. So THG is the HUD group is a global consumer brand and technology group. We were originally founded in 2004. Our first website was actually selling CDs from thehut.com. This has quickly diverged but also specialized in beauty and wellness e-commerce sites, and creating a platform on which we could host and manage multiple sites. And that's a full e-commerce management. So everything from the manufacturing, warehousing, logistics, as well as the actual customer journeys to purchasing. We offer a large amount of stuff. I'll just make sure my slide switches over. Since 2004, we have grown a hell of a lot. We offer a huge suite of platforms. We have around about 300 plus brands that are on our platform. Some of those brands are owned by us. Some of them are third-party brands, and some of them are reasonably well-known third-party ones. Unilever, Nintendo, Nectar, etc. I'm trying to remember which ones I'm allowed to say, which ones I'm not. So if they're on that, I know I can say them. It's a very similar to other providers in the sense of we can do the complete package. We will do everything from marketing through to the sales and deliveries of your products, through to piecemeal. So we have different sections of the business, and we can do just the logistics. You can do your own logistics, and we'll just offer the website experience. That is THG as a whole, and in particular for this audience and for us, it's really about what does that look like under the hood in terms of the databases. So a brief bit of a journey. Back in 2004, we were predominantly a Java house, but also using SQL Server, which is a little bit unusual. And that was mostly single instance. Single server, we're using backups to maintain resilience and disaster recovery capabilities. As we grew and as the platform itself grew, that fairly quickly switched over to using log shipping, failover clusters to maintain resiliency. That still introduced problems though, because we're still talking, it's a classic RDMS where we have a single large server, and it has to keep on growing as it comes up. In early 2017, we did a review of our estate as to what would it take in the event of a failure in our primary DC. Could we fail over to our secondary DC at that point in time, and how long would it take? Databases itself were relatively quick. By relatively quick, we actually estimated that it would take around about 2 hours to get everything brought back up. But then everything was connected. Everything had lots of applications had hard-coded connection strings to the servers. We'd have to repoint IPs. We estimated that it would take around about 8 hours with a lot of manual effort, including of which the instructions for doing that manual failover was stored in the primary DC, not in the passive DC. So a whole swag of things. This kicked off a whole project for us to actually relook at what we needed to do.
Andrew, just on that note,
yes,
what sort of impact did that have to your customers, the fact that it took that long in terms of being able to fail over and get everything back and up and running in a secondary data center?
So luckily, we didn't need to actually do that failover in anger. But what it did have a massive impact is it was extremely painful for us to do patching and maintenance. So if we needed to take a node out of one of our database clusters, if we needed to change a storage array, it was months of effort to plan around it, and then a downtime slot of anything up to 4 hours to say, okay, our websites are going to be down for 4 hours. That's 4 hours where our customers, the people purchasing products, as well as our clients, the companies using our platform, were not taking any money. So we had to plan it extensively, lots of communication, and minimize that downtime slot, which increases the risk. We're less likely to do changes as well, which itself is a risk because you're then not necessarily staying up to date in terms of security processes. So yeah, straight up, no revenue coming through the door while we are down. So if we had to do the in anger disaster, which classic kind of thing, if that's going to occur, it's going to happen when you're under load, as opposed to we're picking the quietest possible time in the year and the day to do this. So we're already it's the lowest revenue time anyway, so the impact is lower. Would have been millions of pounds.
We see it a lot with not just yourselves, but other clients that are using sort of active passive methodologies. It's not just the revenue impact that typically seen, it's also the fact that the customer satisfaction and the brand integrity then is also effective, because we're in a day and age where people expect 24/7 365-day access to web applications and e-commerce applications, and if that is not the case, then there's obviously a lot of eyes that come along with that. So
that is definitely true. And touching on that, it's also around about this time, prior to 2016, the bulk of our business was UK based. In terms of our consumers, you're talking like 90% of the revenue came from the UK. So we could schedule maintenance times in the evenings of UK. We were starting to shift away from that, becoming a global platform, getting more and more traffic from Asia, from Africa, from Americas, all the different time zones around the world. So those time slots when we would have the least impact, we're getting smaller and smaller in terms of actually being able to schedule that maintenance work. And that is, your description is bang on the money with that. That's one of the reasons why we're looking at it and said, okay, what do we need to do? So there was split off into multiple streams of work where we said, okay, our existing estate, what can we do relatively quickly with a minimal impact to improve our resiliency? And also at the same time, this is a really good opportunity to look at what is our actual architecture, what is actually going to allow us to do a step change and look at the next generation. So the quick thing was we switched over to using SQL Server's multi-DC failover clustering, which required a lot of configuration change in applications, but it's able to repoint, and they didn't have to change application code. We didn't have to change database structures, etc. So it was minimal impact. Still, I think it was a 8 or 9 month project with lots of dev teams involved in getting it all in place, but it happened. That got us down to, per database cluster, a 15-minute failover time instead of hours. Much, much better. We could now patch, we could now do other things. in the same time of which we started engaging with Cockroach Labs over, hey, well, first off, we did a review of what options were out there. Options were really things like roll your own, SQL Service availability groups, Spanner from Google. AWS didn't have, is it Aurora, out at that point in time, so they didn't even have an offering in that region, and there was a couple of other ones. I'd known about Cockroach from the last couple of years, been following it with a lot of interest, and we engaged with Cockroach Labs to say, we'd like to do a trial and actually look at, can we use this? So, and yeah, to look at how can we do this in terms of the step change.
So so you mentioned that you've been following Cockroach for a number of years. How sort of wide within the Hut Group organization was Cockroach known when you started looking at sort of alternatives to SQL Server and things like that?
So there was probably only a handful of people, around about 5 people, who had actually heard of Cockroach. A couple of us had been following Cockroach with interest before it was even publicly available, when it was just, yeah, download the from Git and build it yourself sort of model. I think, and this is a great segue in terms of like, why did we look at Cockroach? The big things was it's a true RDMS. It's got ACID compliance, so atomicity, consistency, integrity, and I always forget what the D stands for. Yes, thank you. The ability, one of the key differences between some of the other techniques we were looking at is that it was true active. We wanted to move away from this, particularly in the global nature of our business. We want to move our data closer to where our customers actually are. The people who are using the websites, the people who are using those services behind those websites, THG detect method, for example, service. We wanted to get that data as close as possible to where they are, because that improves their experience. You basically, instead of having someone in Australia, which is where I'm from, incidentally, having to connect to a service, which then has to send a request back to the UK and then wait for the response back. Okay, I'm reading and writing from a database in my node, but with the data which is actually accurate, as opposed to a cached version which might be out of date.
Yeah, so the consistency aspect of the ACID compliance is super important for you guys in the e-commerce space, and then along with the locality features that Cockroach offers. And again, on top of that, the active, super resilient nature sort of ticked all the boxes that you guys were looking for when you were evaluating options.
Exactly. And one of the things we didn't want to do was be tied into one single cloud provider. At the time, as I said, Spanner was out, and we could have gone with that one with a reduced functionality set. They weren't even offering abilities to take backups and restore them or ship them across to other locations.
We didn't have a SQL API at that time either, so they only recently started, working with actual true SQL language. So
yes, yeah. So there's a lot of challenges. We also, in the growth of the company, we bought a hosting company. So we increased our DC footprint from 2 DCs to, I think it's around about 30 DCs now, spread around the world, which is wonderful. And so we wanted to make sure we were able to host our databases, maintain security, ideally in our own DCs, but also we would have flexibility of choosing where would actually fit. The other big thing that we had seen, particularly amongst the relatively small people group that had been following Cockroach, is we had seen consistent deliveries and improvements of Cockroach. It wasn't just a fly-by-night, someone's pet project. It was consistently improving and delivering on those improvements and those roadmaps, saying, this is what we want to do in the next release, and you delivered it on time. That gave us the confidence that this was, while relatively new at that time, is a reasonably safe bet to make use of.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and although we can take the credit for that consistent delivery model that you mentioned, a lot of credit has to go to you guys as well, because without you using the product, testing the product, feeding back to us for the things that the gaps in the product, we wouldn't be able to identify what we needed to deliver. So it definitely goes both ways in terms of roadmap and feature requests and things like that.
Yep, definitely so. Definitely so. So what we decided to do is we picked one of our flagship services that we would move over to Cockroach. And we wanted one where it had a bunch of criteria. It needed to be something that was customer facing, where it would actually had the need to be globally dispersed. We wanted to have high availability and uptime and resilience, but where we could also have a bit of a safety net and go, if we needed to, we could go back to the previous SQL Server method as a safe measure. So we chose to manage our baskets. Service where people put their products into a basket before it goes into checkout. Very important. If people can't put it in the basket, they can't purchase them, we'd lose revenue. So while with all those caveats and safety nets that we put into place, it still had a fair amount of risk, with the goal of having it ready before Black Friday. Black Friday, being a retailer, is our busiest trading period. We generally see anything up to a 4 times throughput in terms of our heaviest period. And rather than being just a spike of 4 times, it's a consistent 4 times. And then we get spikes on top of that in terms of activity. And this is where it gets into, we had some challenges. So one of those challenges, as we started to adopt, we were learning a hell of a lot about Cockroach, how to configure it, set it up, how to make use of it from a developer's perspective. We saw whole clusters die. We saw connections, pools basically get flooded and stuck and unable to connect to databases. So what I'm showing right there is actually the query throughput, where at one point, I think this one was where the connection pool got full and we were unable to send any more queries to the database because we'd misconfigured our use of our connection pool. We're using Hikari to do it, and we needed to adjust some of the connection configurations to make sure we're actually able to use it correctly. We had some of the hardware that we were running on top of wasn't working as well as we'd originally thought. There was constraints around Cockroach is very sensitive to clock skew. So time is very important. We were using a fairly default measure, which was basically ended up using a Active Directory server with a soft one, which itself was running on a VM, which would occasionally skew by anything up to, I think it was around about 20 seconds at any point in time. Didn't happen that often, but Cockroach, depending on which node as was connecting and checking the time at anything point in time, and only really handles up to 500 milliseconds, configurable, which is lovely, difference, it would suddenly cause issues. So we learned a lot about running Cockroach on VMware and handling clocks so that we can improve their stability. Contention, hotspotting. If you don't design your database well enough, if you don't use GUIDs for your primary keys, if you do use an updated date time stamp in an index without sharding your index or hashing your index, then you will end up with hotspots where everything is writing to the exact same node and there's only so much throughput you could get through it. We also had contention in terms of the way the transactions and the query transactions were structured, where in one particular case, we had anything up to 3,000 retries inside Cockroach in another database technology, it would have been a deadlock scenario. One of them would have been just killed. But Cockroach is nice. It actually tries to do retries, and we weren't designing around that. We were just using the database to handle the contention for us.
These are some really good points, because the thing that I try to get across to people when moving from those sort of single instance SQL Server, Oracles, MySQL instances to a distributed system like Cockroach, these are the common things that come up pretty much every time. So it's really important to learn and understand about the product and not treat Cockroach as a single node Postgres instance, for example, because there are, to your point, Andrew, there are nuances that you really need to think about when moving to CockroachDB. And I'm hoping that you're going to show us a little better graph in a second.
Oh yeah, definitely so. And I think before I show that one of the key things, and to build on that, one of the really important key reasons why we kept on pushing through these challenges is, quite frankly, the amazing support that we got from Cockroach Labs. They were incredibly highly engaged. So when we had an incident, because at this stage we were running this in production, we'd done a trial to see where we were happy. And that first incident, which is always a scary time, we called up Cockroach support and said, "We've got this incident." Half an hour later, we're on a screen share session with an experienced support engineer who's diagnosing exactly what's happened and working with us through these to get us back up, but also showing us and allowing us to learn so that we can support it ourselves as well.
Yeah, so the education piece that is typically missing from sort of support packages. But for us, if you can support your own infrastructure, if you can support your own Cockroach DB instance, then we're more than willing to do that education piece, because it benefits us both at the end of the day. So
exactly right. And not only that, the feedback that we were able to give and how receptive yourself and other support engineering team were to incidents where, oh, okay, that'd be great if we improve the documentation so it makes it clear as to what things that we can do. There's challenges. Should Cockroach actually be working in this particular way? Very quickly turn around and saying, hey, let's turn that into a workaround. Hey, that's something that we can improve and add to the roadmap, and taking that feedback on board. We've already seen over the last couple of years, several of our recommendations have become features and enhancement and improvements in documentation in Cockroach. So that engagement is one of the key reasons why we stuck with. So much so that in the lead up to 2019 Black Friday, we were pushing through a high load, and we were handling spikes of activity where not just that the load gradually increased, but a sudden spike of big activity. And those Cockroach was just going, yep, okay. The average query time at the 99th percentile was around about, I think it was 15 milliseconds at the 99th, and it was probably around about 2 milliseconds at the 70th at that point in time. And even with the spikes, still maintained that 15 millisecond peak response time, which was absolutely brilliant.
That's impressive. So what this slide shows really is where you started and where you ended up. So with the right configuration, with the right knowledge of using how to use Cockroach and how to develop against it, you were basically able to get a very, very performant, very resilient and scalable database solution that not only met but exceeded your expectations from the old worlds of SQL Server and things like that.
Exactly. So much so that in early November, in the lead up to Black Friday, there was a debate on internally of going, okay, we're now happy with Cockroach. Its performance is doing well. We've had issues, but it looks okay. And there was a debate: do we stay with it over Black Friday? Do we risk running on with Cockroach for this very key service on Black Friday? If something goes wrong, we're going to lose revenue during our busiest trading period. Decision was, yes, we think it's worthwhile. Let's do it. On Black Friday itself, it shined, quite frankly. we had one of our particular websites, Pop in a Box, which is those little faces on a tiny little body. Extremely niche. Some people absolutely love them. Some people hate them. The marketing team for that team decided to do a fantastic offer. It was a crazy offer. It was something in the order of there was a 80% discount, and then 10 minutes later it was dropped down to 70% on a single character. So what we saw was a 4 times load spike. Now that actual spike of activity took down Citrix load balancers in one of our DCs, right? Actual hardware devices. Cockroach didn't even change the response time. It absolutely handled it like a dream. As a result of that, we have now, since 2019, we've gone from 95% plus of our estate critical database servers being on SQL Server to it's around about 70%. Some of them are just taking longer to move across. And we now have 27 Cockroach clusters in use. We're getting requests for new Cockroach clusters as dev teams are starting their engineering work, probably about one every 3 weeks or so.
This is a powerful slide because it shows 2 things. It shows that, being successful in Cockroach can help you grow and expand your business as well. But it also shows that you're still running 70% of your workloads on SQL Server. And I know from working with you guys, a lot of that is more on the analytical side of things. So I think it's important to raise here that, CockroachDB is not a silver bullet database that is going to fix every single use case for you. However, if there are transactional workloads that require the consistency, like Andrew mentioned, the resiliency, the active nature, the scalability, then those are the things that you will want to be looking at a distributed data like Cockroach. If it's analytical in its nature, then CockroachDB is not going to be a good fit for that workload.
Yeah, exactly right. And so we, the way we do it, and we've worked quite closely with the change feeds product team at Cockroach, because we are fairly heavy users of that. In essence, we stream the data from Cockroach from a handful of our clusters to our SQL Server BI estate. That it was a critical one because, yes, quite frankly, SQL Server and other database technologies, got a few in that region now, are better at doing the OLAP queries and the reporting and sort of things. Use the right tool for the right job, not just a single one. And Cockroach is great on the front end. We have had some teams that have reached out to us and said, hey, we really like the resiliency and the capabilities of Cockroach. And it's like, okay, how are you wanting to use it and why? Okay. So in some cases, it's okay, don't put everything on Cockroach because you want to do X, Y, and Z. You need to split your load out and think about how you're doing that. And that's where a lot of our time is actually spent advising the internal developers. Which is, I think, a good segue into one of the things, next things I wanted to talk about, which is tips and advice that we've got for other people who are looking at Cockroach and who are starting this journey. So some of the technical aspects that I wanted to cover is hot spotting and contention. Yes, you really need to think about how you're designing your architecture. As Dan said, it is not just I have a Postgres database, I'll be able just to lift and shift it across. Think about your architecture so that you're going to reduce hotspotting. Don't have that problem I showed in the earlier slide where it's suddenly having every query being blocked because only one node can handle all the work, because that's your index. Every new row is being written by the same inside the same shard.
Yeah, so if we could talk a little bit about that one, guys. You'll see it a lot in our documentation, but when people move from single node instances over to a distributed system, they usually are very heavily invested in things like auto incrementing integer IDs for their primary keys and things like that. And if you can architect that out early in your migration strategy to CockroachDB, then the contention issues tend to go away, or they're less impacting, at least if you do a lot of that upfront effort.
Yes, and some of that's controllable within the database. So both in terms of your configuration of your database. So look at how your clock is set, minimize your skew difference. We now monitor it, and majority of our classes are within microseconds. Those are within microseconds of each other. As mentioned, your table structure, your index design needs to be taken into account, but also the way your applications are using that. We had one application which would not dynamically in the sense of dynamically building a string, but dynamically built out a transaction to perform its set of actions. Each transaction was therefore slightly different, and it would introduce what would be a classic deadlock scenario, but because of Cockroach's no locking philosophy, would be retrying, and it would get stuck there, just retrying. We had one where I think it was 60 threads all trying to write to the same set of records at the same time, and ended up I think it needed to do around about 3,000 retries before it was able to get them all done. At the same time as which we were having challenges with clock skews, so it was taking at least 500 milliseconds for each retry. That adds up to a lot of time to complete those transactions. Looking at your transactions in that way, make use of select for update early on. Look at the last thing that you need to write to. Select that one for update so that you're going to say, oh yeah, I will need to wait, and it'll actually do it in a logical fashion as opposed to going, yeah, okay, oh no, I need to retry. I need to retry.
Yeah, so it'll eliminate the retry contention by essentially allowing your transactions to queue, and that's what select for update does. So, it's a good advice.
Yep. Engineering effort. This all touches on, and it's a reoccurring theme, as you can tell. Don't underestimate how much engineering effort is. There's a lot of benefit over using Cockroach. You get that high availability and resiliency. As an example of that, we have a policy, and we now do monthly patching, security updates, make sure everything is running smoothly, etc. On our non-Cockroach estate, what that means that every month we have a failovers where we have 15 minutes of downtime at least once a month for those databases. Cockroach, we patch in the middle of the day. I'm not sure I'd be fully comfortable doing it on Black Friday itself, but we don't wait for things to be slow. We move leaseholders around and some data around, and then we just take a node out, patch it, add it back in, bang, 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 done, move on, and zero downtime. But that's because we put in the engineering effort to make sure everything works well. The architecture of the of nodes, but it's also set up correctly, how applications are connecting to the database, so they've got a big enough connection pool, and planning as well. So yeah, those are very, very useful.
Yeah, no, very, very good advice. And I think you hit on a key point there. As easy as we can make the database in terms of the failovers, the resiliency and things like that, there are other considerations that you have to consider in the engineering effort, to your point around the application, the connection pooling, moving leaseholders if you want to be very granular in where the data gets read from, written to, things like that. So no, this is some really good advice, Andrew. So.
Thank you. One of the other ones, think about your availability zones, think about your where you're running each nodes on. You can add tags on the locality information on each of your nodes. So if you're running on sharing a storage array with a group of nodes, tag those nodes with that storage array. If they're all running on the same host, if you're configured in such a way where you're not moving, tag them with the host, tag them with the DC. What this means is that you can then turn around and say, actually, oh yeah, we need to do a maintenance on that storage array. I just want to move stuff off that storage array. I need to move, that VM host needs itself to be patched. I need to move them across. You can do that. You can use the levers that Cockroach has inside it. And those levers are really, really useful.
Yes, that's a really good point around the sort of flexibility of CockroachDB, but a lot of this can be done automatically as well. So by default, Cockroach will do that automatically for you, but with Andrew's situation, it's a slightly different architecture that we've used with those guys, and having the ability at least to manually control where you place data, where you place leaseholders, is a very, very powerful feature that not a lot of databases can offer. So
exactly right. Exactly right. Again, clocks are important. Don't make the same mistake we did and just go, yeah, we'll just use the defaults. Clocks are very important. Make sure you're getting your clock source from the same source, same on your edge, a hardware device, ideally, so that way you're getting consistency and you're able to minimize that and get a high throughput. With my last point I would like to make is one of the challenges. Cockroach is absolutely brilliant at handling failures. When we've had an occasional issue with, say, a storage array might be running a bit slow because of a noisy neighbor also hitting that storage array. The nodes that are on that storage array suddenly run a little bit slower. Setting up your alerts and your monitoring so you're aware of that, and then you can use the levers available to you to then move the load off those nodes is really very useful.
awesome.
Yep, and of course, talk to Cockroach Labs. Get on their Slack channel. Get on their chats. The community support is fantastic. Cockroach Labs engagement. We do see even on the general community chats, they will get involved. They will respond fairly quickly. Of course, yes, do engage with them on a professional level on the enterprise side. Their support is even better. But yes, the level of knowledge is excellent. You get access to people who really know their stuff. It's not just someone who's reading from a script, and they're interested. They're techies who love this kind of stuff as well, and they will help you learn as well.
Yep, there are so many ways to engage with us, whether you've got community Slack channels, whether you go through forums that we have available and things like that. And to Andrew's point, the people that you're actually interacting with are the engineers typically that are building the product, so they know it inside and out. So yeah, very, very happy to engage with anybody who wants to engage with us.
Yeah. Final slide, but before I get on to the, yes, we are hiring. So please do pass me your details, contact me directly. I'm happy to answer any questions. I also want to highlight some of the things that I believe are on the roadmap. So correct me if I get any of these wrong, Dan. One of the key ones we're really looking forward to is the improvements around observability. We have got a challenge right at the moment, which is identifying when there is a hotspot, particularly of a cluster that's working very well, and the queries look fine, but occasionally hotspotting, identifying the exact circumstance and where that hotspotting is occurring and why. Is it a problem with an individual node? Is it a problem in the parameters that they're passing in that query, etc. We use a variety of different techniques for actually looking at monitoring, getting directly on the box itself, on the console itself, reading some of the internal tables inside Cockroach. There's been some really good improvements in 21.2 around the observability. The SQL statements page is lovely, and I believe there's some more improvements coming in 22.1, which we're very excited about. Yeah. Good. I'm not getting Dan saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have said that yet."
No,
So,
no, you're right. No, there's a lot of observability enhancements that are coming out in 22.1. We are scheduling to release that typically in the April-May timeframe. If anybody is interested in that, so yeah, yep. lots of observability. And I mean, what you talked about some of the workarounds there in terms of using system tables and things like that, but I think it's also important to highlight the fact that there are third-party tools that you can use as well. So do you want to talk a little bit about those, Andrew?
Yes, so a great tool that we have been trialing and we've, I believe is on the chat at the moment. So there's things like DB Marlin, I think Datadog are also up there. A lot of the tools are more about exposure of the metrics. I, in particular, am a fan of the DB Marlin because it gives you visibility of the actual queries that are running, not just the metrics of saying, yes, we've had so many queries. what were the queries, where were they, which ones ran slow. So those are some great tools around those as well. On some of the other improvements that we're also looking forward to, change feeds, improvement in the performance of change feeds so that we can actually, one of the challenges right at the moment, we have one of our clusters has around about 3,000 change feeds that are going through to topics in Kafka. Change feeds wasn't built around the idea of that, so it uses the leaseholder of the job in order to do some of the coordination work. The idea of having 3,000 change feeds coming from a single cluster, they hadn't thought of. So it introduces itself very hot spotting in the sense of the CPUs runs a little hotter of whichever one is on the leaseholder on that cluster. So there's a lot of improvements, I believe, in the pipeline around that, and we've seen that consistently.
So sorry, Andrew, but there's internal load balancing for creating change feeds that is happening. Well, they're pretty much nearing completion now. So whether that'll make it into 22.1 or whether it'll go in 22.2, it is definitely coming. So that adds to the stability, and not only the stability, but the scalability of using those change feed options. The other thing to also notice, and I don't want to steal your limelight here, is we're also looking at something called cluster-to-cluster streaming, which is more of your asynchronous replication type of technologies that you're used to with active passive type setups. So again, no firm commitments on when we're going to deliver that, but it is definitely on the roadmap for an upcoming release.
Fantastic. That was actually going to be the next one I'm really looking forward to, which is that, yes, being able to have secondary clusters from not at least from a pure DR perspective, and also from a functionality. We have designing our architecture in such a way that at the moment with Cockroach, with the multi-DC, if a DC loses connectivity, so you end up with a network partition, we turn around and say, well, okay, at the load balancer, at the outside level, redirect traffic to the other DCs. That makes sense and is good approach. What we're actually investigating is we have a few use cases where what we actually want to do is go into a degraded functionality. If you think of it, a nice, easy way to think about it is instead of being able to place orders, you can at least browse the website in those DCs. We wouldn't actually use it for the websites, we'd redirect them, but we have a few services where we would want to have that capability. Cluster streaming is going to make that architecture a lot simpler. So definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, that is definitely one possibility. The other thing that you guys may want to look at, and anybody else interested in that type of use case, is we're also looking at implementing something called bounded staleness, which allows you to, it's very restrictive. So you have to read from primary keys, for example, but in the event of a network partition, for example, you can still read from the minority part of that network, but only in very, very peculiar and very strict circumstances, reading from primary keys. And you have to be very, very specific in defining what bounded staleness is to you. Is it 30 milliseconds? Is it 5 seconds? Is it 5 minutes? But those are all things that we are definitely considering. So I hope this shows a lot of you on here that, you know, we do put a lot of thought into a lot of the different use cases that people come up with. So feedback is ultimately extremely important to us. So to Andrew's point earlier on, please engage with us if you have any particular feature requests or an odd use case that you're considering and things like that.
Oh, that sounds absolutely amazing. Bounded staleness, yes, fantastic. First I'm hearing about it, and yes, I'm already excited about it.
Thought I'd keep that one in for you.
Thank you. Good to end with a smile on my face as well. And finally, as everyone's hopefully been seeing, got up there, we are hiring. We have the development teams who are engaging and using Cockroach. So everything from juniors who've never played with Cockroach through to people who have, and we're thinking about a switch over. Data reliability engineers, we're writing the tools that actually allow the DBAs and other engineers to build out Cockroach, to manage it, to put it into new physical locations, working with networks teams, choosing the hardware and services that it's going to run on. One of the ones we've got at the moment is trialing a use of running our Cockroach clusters on Kubernetes and hybrid ones of those. How do we automate the deployment of that? Turn them into more of a that in particular, those ones into self-service. And of course, DBAs and SQL developers who are interested in maintaining and making sure that best practices are being followed. Not just that we're taking backups, but also providing guidance to developers, looking at the database structures and making sure you're going, okay, yep, you're doing this in Cockroach. You're using a monotonically ascending integer. Don't. Okay, this is how you can change it. This is how you can work with them to do it. So please reach out. You can email me directly. You can connect me on LinkedIn. Go and browse our job page, even if it's just an off the record chat to say, hey, this is where I'm coming from. Where could I possibly fit in? Reach out to us. We're always hiring.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. If anybody does have any questions, we can keep 2 or 3 minutes for the questions. Please use the Q&A box or the chat box. But yeah, very, very insightful presentation. And like Andrew said, anybody who's interested in learning more about jobs at the Hut Group and working with CockroachDB, then reach out to Andrew. So it doesn't look like there are any questions. So just in finishing the webinar then, guys, the webinar recording will be made available within the next couple of hours on YouTube and the various social media platforms. So look out for that. And yeah, we will catch you all on the next webinar. So thank you very much. And thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.